And finally this evening, Garth Rossiter. Garth is with Lula Lend, and you must have seen some quite incredible stories of struggle, survival, and making a plan over the last 12 months, Garth.
Yes, Bruce, you're quite right. It's been an interesting period. We've seen SMEs, our clients, struggling. And obviously, in terms of our role, where we aim to solve cash flow issues for business and do it quickly, there have been a couple of spanners thrown in along the way, both in terms of lending to new clients, but also obviously supporting our existing clients through this tough time.
I mean, it was absolutely clear when we went into lockdown, the eve of lockdown, and I was sent some audio of Grant Patterson breaking down as he was speaking to his suppliers, many of whom would be small and medium enterprises, suppliers into EdCon, for example. And he said to them, terribly sorry, we can't pay your bills. And there, the dominoes started falling, because when a large corporate like EdCon can't pay, the little guys get hit hardest. And I think that's where the trouble started for so many small enterprises.
No, I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Bruce. It's we've seen it across the board. I mean, industries from offline retail, I think specifically, construction, hospitality, restaurants, manufacturing, and obviously travel, which we see all the time. But I think, when that cash flow dries up, it becomes a very real problem for these businesses. And what we're seeing, I think 90% of our clients were saying they only had cash flow to last for a month, which is a scary place to be for some of these businesses. There were some businesses, obviously, which benefited. So things like communication, where the data sort of side of things, with all the working from home, and education did okay. But obviously, the essential services and groceries, etc., more defensive industries did okay. But it's been a difficult place for SMEs, and I don't think we're out of the woods yet.
We most certainly are not. I mean, we've seen a roller coaster in terms of the stages of lockdown. The president on Sunday moving us back to lockdown level 1. And we know what comes next. It's lockdown level 3 as we come to an inevitable resurgence of COVID. As we open up the economy, we start interacting more, we start feeling more comfortable, and ultimately infections will rise once again. And that will, again, in government's mind anyway, necessitate a lockdown. How on earth do the small and medium enterprises survive the uncertainty that we see each and every single day?
Well, I think that's exactly the issue, is that uncertainty, and trying to understand that. From what we're seeing, Bruce, is obviously one of the biggest issues these small businesses have, and it's borne out by stats from TransUnion, is that cash flow and access to cash flow, and just trying to get through the period is what's one of the biggest issues. And that's where we kind of fill the gap, I guess. We solve those cash flow issues, and without trying to create cash flow issues for businesses. And that's why affordability is such an important thing to assess for us. And our modeling, our scoring of clients, our assessing of the affordability, it has historically always, what is driven by AI and machine learning, which is great in a benign and consistent environment. But in order to determine how these businesses get through that cycle, we've needed to be a lot more forward-looking, because you can't model for government-imposed restrictions, the drop to level 1 and up again to level 3. So we obviously, they need that cash flow just to get them through that these little dips. And obviously, it's a case of understanding whether the business itself is actually going to make it through that process, or it was on a downward trajectory to start with.
Just because businesses have survived for 12 months doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to survive through the next 3 or 6 or 9 or 12. How on earth do you make a decision on who to back and who to let go in this environment?
Well, there are a lot of factors that come into that, Bruce. It's obviously our modeling is fairly advanced in terms of looking at a lot of factors, like the age in business and how long the business has been around for, the industry recovery, whether it's a cyclical cyclical downturn, or it's a big word, but and otherwise it's so we build in a lot of factors to look at whether there's a seasonally adjusted number, or whether we can actually rely on the fact that they are getting out of the cycle. It's a difficult call to make, but obviously we've got to monitor which industries are likely to open up quicker, which rely less on social distancing, etc.
And I suppose it helps that we learned some awful lessons in the first 3, then extended by another 2 weeks lockdown, which was the most devastating of all of them because it was a zero compromise. Nobody was allowed to move unless you had a certificate saying you were an essential worker or unless you were going to get groceries. And that was crippling. That killed the weakest in the litter. It was Darwinian in the way in which it worked. The lockdowns have been a little bit more, they shouted at for this, but possibly logical. Subsequent to that, and government, I think, is more cognizant now of the impact of lockdowns when it comes to the destruction of livelihoods.
No, I think you're right. I think the government's made some really good sounds in terms of understanding the impact on business now and the value business plays to the South African economy and SMEs in particular. I think President Ramaphosa said last week, and he highlighted a few facts, that 60% of the private sector jobs are created in the private sector. A vast majority of formal businesses are, I think 98.5% of formal businesses are in fact SMEs. So this is where your job creation is going to come from. This is where the government needs to start focusing its attention. And I think in the budget we saw that as well. There was a lot more focus on SMEs, whether it's it actually comes to fruition, we have to see, but I think the rumblings are correct and they're saying the right things to move towards a more focus on that SME sector.
I mean, if we are going to scrabble for an upside in the down, it is that finally government is acknowledging the importance of the sector. I'm not too sure that the Department of Small Business Development is of any use, significant use to growing industry and to growing small enterprises. It seems to be there exclusively for the survival of survivalist businesses. But it's a government finally acknowledging the role that small enterprises have to play. And I mean, for guys like you, it's to grasp the nettle while you can in terms of really working for the benefit of small enterprises. We need each and every single enterprise and the jobs they provide.
Couldn't agree more. It's what they're saying is very helpful for the economy, I believe, and they do seem to be grasping that. And coincidentally, I think the upside of down is possibly a good title for a book if you were ever considering
somebody should write it. I try to be subtle. You weren't. But I'm grateful. Garth Rossiter, thank you very much indeed. Garth Rossiter is with Lulaland, looking at the complexity of providing short-term finance to businesses that can't see a week, 2 weeks, a month ahead, and trying to figure out who to help save and who to let go as we head inevitably to a third wave at some point in the next couple of months. Garth, thanks very much indeed. Well, that's it for Taking Stock for this evening. Thank you very much for watching. To Garth Rossiter.